Good morning, everyone. Michelle Fideli from First 5 Marin Children and Families Commission. We're very happy to have you here today for the last forum from the Marin Communications Forum, our monthly events to discuss public policy issues. If you missed November, you missed the cannabis discussion, but it's on videotape and on YouTube, so we'll be sharing that with you so that you can revisit that or any of the forums that we are hosting. First 5 Marin, for those of you who don't know, is your local Children and Families Commission. There's one in every county, and we invest your Prop $10 in the young children of this county, focusing on children's health, school readiness, and community support for families. So this forum is part of that effort. For your handouts today, you'll see we have the op-ed that was published yesterday, which basically shares some of the information that will be coming out today, as well as a special document that we had printed that summarizes housing costs, childcare costs, and the struggle of working families to make ends meet here. That document was prepared by our colleague Robin Brandis, who does a great job giving a picture and beautiful presentation to our words, so thank you, Robin. On that document, just want to point out, on the back, it mentions the self-sufficiency standard that comes from the Insight Center for Community Development. It's actually that $102,000 figure for a family of 4 is actually a 2014 figure. It was the latest that was available from them. So as you can imagine, with the latest rent and childcare costs, it must be much higher than that, but we'll get into that with our speakers today. Just before we begin, I just wanted to mention I pulled out the real estate section from the IJ yesterday, and just a very few properties were sold, and there were a couple high ones, 4.2 million, some 2.5 million, 42.5 million. So that must skew the numbers up a bit. There were a few more affordable ones in the 900s, and there was one in Corte Madera for $285, and all I can imagine that must be someone's garden shed. So, but that's where we're at. So we're very anxious to present to you today, and we're going to begin with opening remarks from Cynthia Murray from the North Bay Leadership Council.
Good morning. How's everybody today? I'm cranky. I hate getting up early. I hate Mondays. I hate the traffic. I live in Petaluma now, and so I'm probably going to complain a little bit more than I intended to about what's happening. But Friday night certainly didn't make my mood any better when the tax reform bill was passed. I really hope all of you, when you get your tax break, are going to do what Grassley said and spend it on booze, women, and movies. How many people intend to do that? Raise your hands. Yeah. Thank you very much. Talk about out of touch. Spoiler alert. How do people make ends meet in Marin? They don't. And for the few lucky ones that do, we're not going to talk about them today. I'm here to talk about what we really are facing here and what we can do about it. So I'm not going to be all gloom. I'm going to offer some solutions, because I think that's the key thing, is once you identify a problem, let's figure out how we fix it. So together, I hope we can. We have a housing crisis. We've had a housing crisis for decades. We just had these horrible fires in the North Bay. And so now, with the loss of 6–7% of the housing stock there, we now have a housing crisis on steroids. So everything that we had calculated earlier is now worse. And the inequities are going to be worse from this damn tax reform bill that was just passed. So let's see what we can do to make it better. The housing that was lost in the North Bay is equal to all the housing that's been built in the North Bay in the last few years. So we had made very little progress, but now we're even going in the wrong direction. We're going in the reverse. In addition, 7,000 workers in the North Bay have been displaced. And we're really, really worried where those workers went, because we haven't seen a lot of them sticking around. And you should be really worried, because a lot of those workers who lived in Sonoma County and lived in Napa and other places worked in Marin. We've seen a big impact on our healthcare workers, on our teachers, on our people who work as public employees, on our child care workers, on our preschool teachers. We are seeing a major, major loss of that workforce. And that is something that all of us should be worried about. If we take that the data has shown somewhere around 60% of the workers in Marin commute in from other counties, this will have a major impact. It is already increasingly hard to fill positions in Marin County. If you talk to the employers, they are saying this is one of their biggest concerns, is the lack of a skilled workforce, their inability to fill jobs. The disaster that has happened will now make filling those jobs even harder, because what happens when you lose that housing stock and you don't have new supply, the prices are going to go up, up, up. For sale, for rent, all going up, up, up. That when we already can't house the workers the people who work here, and now they have to move even further away, it's likely we'll lose those workers. The only solution is for Marin to build more housing. Businesses can't thrive without a workforce, they can't grow, and if they can't get their basic minimum workforce, they can't stay here. They will not be able to stay in business. And so we have to understand, when housing costs are out of reach for families, for workers, even two-worker families, it's going to have major impacts. So it used to be, we used to say, all we wanted to talk about was jobs, jobs, jobs. All we need to talk about now is housing, housing, housing. It is the key. We will need that to keep our schools running, to keep our hospitals working well, to keep our streets and parks and other facilities operating. This is a wake-up call. We have an emergency, and the need for more housing is the answer. So, Marin has a housing emergency. Why? The high cost of housing. Marin has a congestion problem. Why? The high cost of housing. Marin has an environmental problem. 60% of greenhouse gas emissions come from cars, of people having to do long commutes. What is the solution? More housing. We have an equity problem. Why? The high cost of housing. We have an economic problem. Why? The high cost of housing. It's not often that only one solution could solve so many problems. We can do this. We must do this. We have to figure out, how do we get more housing? So let me give you some ways that I think we could do. First, we need to develop the political will to approve more housing. We have the ability to get more housing here, but we need the community support of our elected officials to do the right thing, to approve these projects, to make them happen. There are many, many projects. For example, what Lucas had proposed, a housing project that would have benefited the community in so many ways that he was going to pay for, and we can't even get that approved. This is not right. We need to say we need it, we want it, we're going to fight for it, and we're going to fight for people who support housing to represent us. We need to do that first and foremost. We need candidates who are willing to go on the line and say, I am standing for more housing in Marin County. We need those loud, clear voices to be elected. And how do we do that? We get people to register for to vote and to vote. Unfortunately, a lot of people are not registered, or those who are registered aren't voting. It is really time to make your voice heard. Second, we have to find more funding for housing. At the state level, they passed 15 pro-housing bills. There's some funding in there. There's other counties that are looking at going on the ballot and doing bond measures for housing. It's time that Marin County takes it seriously and the people of this county say, we are going to work together and find this funding to do housing in Marin County. Third, we have to accept that the only way to reduce the cost of housing is to build more housing. The prices will always go up if the demand is more than the supply. We have been under-housing, under-building for decades. We are now, as I said earlier, a housing crisis on steroids. We have to figure out what we're going to do, and we need to get creative. We can't just do it the way it's always been done. We need to look at more mixed use. We need to look at how can we put housing in places maybe it hasn't been before. I'm not saying in open space or parks, but we have opportunities for housing that we have not used, and many of it could be on existing public land, which should really be explored. One of my most exciting ideas, my fourth idea, is the whole idea of junior accessory dwelling units and accessory dwelling units. There have been studies showing that in Marin County, a huge amount of the people have unused bedrooms. We have a county with houses, most of them have 3, 4 bedrooms, and only 1 bedroom being used. That can be converted into a junior accessory dwelling unit and made into an affordable workforce unit for somebody, for a teacher who now can't live in the community to live in the community in which she teaches, for a retail clerk to be able to work near the store that she works at. We have opportunities. We could, using junior accessory dwelling units, which Rachel Guinness from Lily Pad Homes went to the state and got special legislation to make it much easier to do, to reduce permitting costs, to reduce hookup fees, all the things. We could do thousands of new units within a year. If we just did a few percentage of the existing homes in Marin, we could create thousands of new units in existing neighborhoods where the infrastructure is already there. This would not only help us with creating new units, it helps the homeowners, many of them who are seniors who could use a source of income, and this is our greatest opportunity in the immediate future, and I hope that we can all pursue that. Any of you who have possibilities of making a junior accessory dwelling unit, contact Rachel Guinness, Lily Pad Homes, homebred in Marin County. We also need to help overcome the challenges to new development. As we've seen, the California Environmental Quality Act has become less an environmental document and more a hammer to do opposition. And we need to start looking at how do we make that not be a way to shut down development. We need to look at our regulatory fees and cost of getting new permits, because a lot of times people aren't building because they can't make any profit. And so we have to figure out how do we make this work again, that housing can be approved and get done in our lifetimes. We've had many, many projects crash and burn, and they're things that we could be doing we're just not doing. 6, kudos to the Board of Supervisors who developed this innovative landlord-tenant partnership with the Marin Housing Authority that's added new landlords to take Section 8 housing vouchers and is succeeded in growing one of the hardest to grow rental stocks in the county. Bravo. Great job. We really are proud of you. And 7th, let's plan for the future. We have a future coming where we're going to move to autonomous vehicles. When we do that, we will not need garages. We will not need parking lots. All of these could become ripe for new housing. And let's start to anticipate that opportunity and think about what is it like when people have more mobility without having to clog up the streets with parking and all the other things that are eating up a lot of the precious real estate in our areas where we could do infill development. I think that can be a great opportunity. And 8th, let's help our seniors, whose population is expected to increase by 50% by 2030. We need all kinds of senior housing. We cannot neglect the people who have given so much to this county and force them out at the end of their times when they need us the most to be close. I really hope that we can come together on that. So I say it's time to say yes to more housing in Marin. And one of the things that we have done is create the Housing Crisis Action Group, which several of us came together and said, we're tired of talking about it, let's do something. And we have a rapid response team to go out and support projects and write letters and show up at hearings and give that political will to our elected officials to know that when somebody's in the room screaming no more housing, there's going to be many more people in the room saying, yes, we need housing, please vote for this, please give us this housing we so desperately need. So I urge you to check it out. They're hcag.org and join us in that. We need an army of supporters. I hope you'll be that army. We can secure the future of Marin County by making housing our top priority. That is the way that we help make ends meet. That is the way we help change one of the biggest causes of inequities, and we need to show that the political will is there to solve this housing problem for our workforce, for our employers, for the seniors, for the people trying to rise up out of poverty, for our environment, for breaking traffic gridlock, for the brightest future. Let's bring our workforce home. Thank you. I thought I was done, but she says I'm going to take questions.
We have time for just a couple questions. There will be more time to comment later, but if you have something specific to ask. Cynthia?
Yes.
I can't think of his name, but there's a politician who represents Marin who passed that, some kind of legislation or bill, whatever it is, takes Marin out of the...
Assemblymember Levine.
Yeah, that good guy. So, don't you think that is going to continue to have a negative effect on affordable housing in Marin? I'm not sure how long that moratorium lasts or whatever, but...
Too long, and yes.
Yeah, I mean, that kind of sets Marin up for a not-so-good situation.
That means that we haven't made our voices loud enough for Assemblymember Levine to hear. That's not what we want.
Right.
Thank you. Yes.
Because there's some nonprofits in the room, I wanted to ask you, is there a way that the Housing Crisis Action Group could create a resolution that we could present to our board of directors regarding joining this group and just educating our boards more on this topic?
Yes, I will make sure that happens. Contact me and I'll make sure I get it. Anybody interested, you can either send an email to hcag.org or contact me directly.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Behind you.
I'm sorry to say that it appears that shopping centers are kind of going on the bye-bye now with online ordering. And I know there have been questions about Northgate Shopping Center. It seems like a perfect location for senior housing and or infill housing.
It's my understanding that is a proposal right now.
Great. Thank you.
Okay.
Can I take his question?
Please.
Even though you're back there? Oh,
Please.
There's somebody.
Thank you. So, in your comments, you noted that this is a decades-old problem, right? This is not a new problem, and someone innovatively called Marin affordable in 1889, right? I mean, it's been a long time. I'm a relative newcomer. I've only lived here 6 years, and it's been unaffordable, you know, in inverted commas, since I lived here. So that being the case, if it's been happening for decades, what is the structural catalyst to change the path that Marin's been on for decades? Is it the fires, or is it something idiosyncratic like fires, or is it the collection of voices in the room, or is it a mixture of both, or is it something else?
Well, first of all, Marin's not alone. The state has underbuilt for decades, and that is, I think, part of the regulatory system that has put more barriers up for housing and increased the expenses for builders and developers to even get housing projects to pencil. So that's part of the problem. The fires, and I think the sense that the state has finally woken up, and that's why they passed 15 bills, is that we're soiling our own nest here by not doing anything about it. So I think it needed to get really, really bad before enough people decided we need to do that. There's also some things in Marin County that go on around fear of the other and fear of, different ethnicities and classes and things like that, that maybe is more exaggerated in Marin County than other parts of the state. So I think that's something that we need to always be cognizant of when we're looking at the specific problem in Marin. They're taping it, so they want you to. Yep.
We just recently received a study that says that not just having problems, that Marin is by these various measures, the single most racist county in the state of California. So this is a big problem, and it seems to me that we need to frame all discussions, particularly housing, if we're going to re-engineer it, with this in mind, that or do we just assume, because there doesn't seem to be outrage about this, or do we just assume that that's a given? That when we talk about housing, income, and all of the other social measures, I just think it's important to put the fact that we're number one. This is not a good place to be number one. It would be a good place to be number 58. But right now, I'd settle for number 2.
I think that's a reference to the new report from the Advancement Project. They have a new report called Race Counts, and one of their findings is that Marin County was the #1 for inequity, and we'll be talking about that, I think, soon in the coming year. We're working on scheduling that.
That gentleman had a question.
Yeah, there was a book written called Ecotopia many years ago, and one of the solutions was build density where there's transportation. So the idea is 101 corridor, build it up. Have multi-story buildings in San Rafael. Now there's going to be inertia against this type of thing. And with the SMART train, we saw that too. It divided the environmental community because they thought if you build the train, then it's going to attract more people and you're going to build up the corridor, but that's the way it has to go. Otherwise, it's sprawl.
Well, those of you who are older remember in the 1970s when the county did their general plan, making the last place last, there was an agreement that we would drive all the development to the 101 corridor and protect our open space and our ag land and our park land so that 85% of the county would remain undeveloped, and the rest would be concentrated along the freeway and now the transportation corridors, which is the whole point of transit-oriented development, trying to reduce people's dependency on cars. And I would say that it looks like that compact has not been upheld. We did the protections, but we didn't do the other side of the agreement, which is driving the growth to house our children and our seniors and our workforce within the 101 corridor. That should not stand. Done? Thank you.
Thanks very much. That was 7 solutions. Appreciate your comments. We're going to continue now with a presentation from Rob Eiler from the Marin Economic Forum. And while we're doing that, I want to introduce First Five Marin's Executive Director, because she snuck in without introduction, Amy Reich. And I want to thank her for supporting these forums each month as part of our outreach to the community. Thank you, Amy.
Good morning, folks. So Cynthia took on a lot of topics there and had a lot of good solutions. Just in case you don't know me, I'm an economist, and so a lot of what I'm going to tell you has a little bit of dismal science in it. But I'm going to try to provide you with some of the basic data around where we've been going the last, let's say, 10 or 12 years or so, and then also try to provide a dose of reality about actually getting things done, because a lot of it boils down, unfortunately, in some cases, and from my angle, very fortunately, to basic economic arguments. So one of the reasons we're where we are is because we've had a good recovery after the recession. And I've been on probably 25 or 30 panels since 2009 talking about the socioeconomics of Marin County and our greater region. And when in 2009 and 10, we were talking about the creation of jobs in the wake of the recession. What we're now talking about are how do we create jobs that allow people to live where they work. And so the conversation always changes with the evolution of the macroeconomy, and that's one of the unfortunate realities is that with that context, it's not easy to solve these problems. It takes a lot of effort, a lot of political will, and a recognition that we're in markets in which there is not a want for change. So let's start thinking about this in the sense of thinking about education. And one of the nasty trade-offs that exists is that one way of trying to make things more affordable is to try to wage your way into affordability. The problem with that does is it actually wages your way into, let's say, more excess demand conditions, unless the supply side is moving. So one of the things that Cynthia alluded to, which is very important, is the recognition that we have high housing prices because the demand has exceeded the supply, and the slow evolution of the housing market in terms of supply is now catching up with us, even though we think in the 90s and the last decade we built a lot of homes. We still are being outpaced by demand, which is the natural generator of any inflationary episode. So education is one way that we can think structurally we can change income outcomes for a lot of different people. And that's something I'm going to come back to in just a minute when we talk about the evolution of wages and the evolution of education, because what we'll see is we'll see a little bit of a disparity there, which can help to explain why we have many ways of looking at this problem throughout Marin County. The next thing is to think about the evolution of that workforce. So we think about, let's say, lower wage workers working in Marin. The Bay Area has a long history of commuting all over the place to work all kinds of wages and all kinds of jobs and skill base. That will not change easily, and you have to recognize that. It's not an easy change. However, when you put these two together, education can lead to a higher wage workforce and potentially different types of workers here in Marin County. We have a real dichotomy, and something that Cynthia alluded to also is that 60% of workers approximately are inbound into Marin County, and about 60% are outbound residents to work some other place and bring higher incomes back to Marin County. The wage disparity is maybe as much as 3 times difference between the average person that leaves Marin County as a resident and works outside Marin County to the inbound worker that's coming from outside to work a job in Marin County, okay? But that disparity is a recognition of 2 things. One, the type of workers that are inbound, and the types of jobs offered here that are not acting as a natural magnet to keep our residents here who then seek higher wages some other place and bring those home. The second order of effects is that when those higher incomes land in Marin County, they lead to higher housing prices, higher retail settings, more sales tax, and these positive and negative trade-offs that some folks in Marin County enjoy and some people in Marin County lament. And that balancing act, folks, is the core around any market setting, okay? The disparities, do they exist? We're going to see they do exist, and they actually exist partially on ethnic lines, which is probably not a shocker to a lot of people in the room, but I want to show you the data that showcases that to a certain extent, and it's good to talk about that, as that can lead to housing disparities based on the fact that you have this sort of lag in terms of wages. And then we want to, at the end, I'm going to talk about some strategies and practices and things we can think about. But folks, here's the key. We got to think regionally. The problem, and Cynthia alluded to this, is that it's not just in Marin County. And Marin County cannot solve these issues alone because it is in a regional marketplace. The fires are going to showcase that over the next couple of years, that the loss of labor or the rearrangement of labor force and housing and commuting are all going to start to slowly show their face. For example, in the space between Petaluma and Cotati, there is a long road called Stony Point Road. Does anybody know Stony Point Road? Last week, there were 185 trucks backed up into the rock quarry that's on Stony Point Road. Why? Because they were slowly taking up materials to go northbound as the beginning of the process with the fires is starting, okay? So we're going to see more and more of that activity, and as that activity happens, it's going to change labor markets in Marin County, as Sonoma County evolves, as Napa County evolves, and we should not forget that Napa County is also a player in this, which will start to bleed over in the rest of the Bay Area, Okay, this is a regional issue and should always be seen as such. So, a couple things to think about. When you think about the economics of housing, you have to think about the economics of wages and jobs, and it starts with the so-called middle skills gap. So something that California is a microcosm of across the United States is that we're slowly seeing the erosion of so-called middle skill opportunities. So there are a lot of opportunities out there for folks with just a high school diploma or with, let's say, less than a high school diploma with a certain skill base. Then there's this gap where folks have got a little bit more college work but not necessarily gotten a BA or above, which is called middle skill by the way that we measure labor markets. And then there's high skill, which means you have at least a bachelor's degree. There's a slow erosion of jobs and opportunities in those so-called middle skill jobs because the jobs that used to be in that middle skill, generally manufacturing and construction, have now dichotomized themselves into relatively low education and specific skills or high education and management. And so we've seen this middle skill gap. And the problem with that ultimately is it leaves a middle class gap that then becomes a housing issue. You end up commuting if you're in a middle wage situation, where low wage you might find more subsidization and a high wage you may be able to afford it. That gap gets higher because of that. We have the shortage of STEM workers. So if you look at the wage discrepancies, part of it is because we don't have enough STEM jobs, or what we can think of as science, technology, engineering, and math jobs. We have, in a sense, some issues in education. As an educator myself, one of the biggest things I have, and I'll come back to this later, what do I promise students that are going to get a bachelor's degree if they don't have some STEM training, when a lot of our jobs that are relatively high wage are more and more STEM dependent? So that's also an issue that we're watching very closely as economists. And the other thing is thinking about healthcare. If healthcare jobs are possibilities because we're going to need them more as California ages, are we training a workforce for this? And can we actually retool people in such a way to break them out of these housing and wage constraints by seeking higher wage careers in something like healthcare? We're going to have the demand. Whether or not we're going to have the supply, or we're going to have to broaden our importing of that supply, is an open question. Unfortunately, on top of that, we now have a short-term problem regionally, which is in construction. Once Sonoma County and Napa County starts to rebuild, there will be, as I alluded to earlier, a rearrangement of the labor force, and that's going to start in construction. You're also going to see students, high school graduates, and people who used to do something else look at construction as a short-term play because there's going to be a shortage here. So after the recession ended, we heard about this flight of construction workers and contractors to other places because the market had dried up. Well, that has slowly left us with a shortage of that labor force that now we are importing to solve the problems we have exacerbated by the fires. So we're watching that also very closely to see if that hypothesis actually becomes theory. But we should expect there's some short-term regional issues in terms of finding a contractor. Okay? And we'll see how that goes. So, one thing I also wanted to talk about before I show you a bunch of data and start to wrap up is the following. There's a very small line between equality and equity, and it's very important to recognize this when you start thinking about housing solutions. The idea of equality is that everybody gets a pair of shoes, right? And you can think about that everybody should have a house to own. You can think about that as the next step up from this argument, right? But equity is actually giving everybody a house or a shoe that fits, okay? So we want people to be equal, right? We want everybody to be homed. But the argument we're talking about here, which is underlying everything, is really one of equity. Can we get everybody homed in a way that actually builds wealth, right? Having a home is obviously the first step. But the natural cycle of housing is you go from rental to ownership because there are benefits, with the recent tax plan aside. There are generally benefits from home ownership. One of them is the fact that you actually are building wealth. You know, before 3 days ago, it was actually you got a lot of tax deductions too. But the bottom line, folks, is that we think of rooting labor is usually because they are rooted through a home that they own. All right? So that equality, equity argument spins around the housing discussion tightly. Same thing happens with jobs. One of the biggest issues also in saying, okay, well, if we had better jobs, we might be able to afford houses more completely. Well, we have to also recognize there's that job matching problem. Not only in middle skills there's a job matching problem, but in general, we have available labor. But the idea is that we just have not been able to take skills and what employers want and match them well. This is a long-standing so-called friction in labor markets that economists watch very closely, that our unemployment rate, for example, even though it is relatively low historically, is not necessarily a reflection of the number of people who are actually unemployed. Okay? The unemployment rate in the United States right now, if you take that into consideration, the so-called under or marginally employed is about 6.5%. Okay? Is higher than what we see in the newspaper. And we're struggling with that as economists to measure that well. The other thing, and this is a big point, is that income and wealth equality are two different things, or the inequality measures. It's income inequality, believe it or not, in the United States has slowly gotten better in the recovery period. Slowly, very slowly. It is wealth inequality that has gotten way worse. Okay? So when you hear about the so-called 1%ers, that divide has been exacerbated, specifically with our equity markets rising at the pace they have. And of course, if you were lucky enough and have, you know, a $30,000 job and bought $30,000 worth of Bitcoin, you've now jumped into the 1% overnight. But very few people have that scenario, so that wealth inequality issue is something that housing can help alleviate if we take people and put them in housing that they own. One of the biggest tricks in how we build is, are we going to build homes to rent or homes to own? Because if we build them to rent, we will not deal necessarily with either the income inequality or wealth inequality issues that are the genesis, generally, of how housing disparities take place. Because you need wealth to build, to jump into a home and do it right financially. And if you can't build wealth, you will struggle to gain access to home ownership. And a lot of that's market-based. So, what can we do? And so I started off with education. If you have at least a bachelor's degree, and this is a generality, it's around $1 million more of lifetime income earnings than someone who does not have one. And that's the way our labor markets reflect so-called high skill or education as a way of coming into the labor market. So we watch this very closely also, because one of the things that's tricky in that is not everybody with a bachelor's degree is created equal. So this is an average idea, but the supposition that not getting a bachelor's degree is not the way forward long-term over a lifespan to generating more income and more potential wealth is incorrect. We need people to have education. The problem is, just like any other marketplace, if everybody had a bachelor's degree, it would make the bachelor's degree less worth. Okay? So we struggle with that too. Here's some data about ethnicity by residents specifically in California in 2009. So this was the education level with less than high school. So you can see the Hispanic population in terms of the census was relatively high. Almost 45% of Hispanic residents of California had less than high school education. For high school diplomas only, meaning that there wasn't actually the achievement of a high school diploma, it was a little lower for Hispanic, obviously, which is good, because it means that we saw some shift toward that, and then we see that the white African American and the total population slowly climbed up. And what we want to see is a slow ascension, hopefully. Okay? This is the next step, which is some college, meaning the middle skill piece, and this is BA or above. Okay? So the problem here is with the Hispanic population, we do have some bachelor's degree holders, some with college, some high school, but we have a large amount that do not have high school, and this is right at the bottom of the recession, okay? But the other parts are ascending, though in the African American case, there are fewer bachelor's degree holders, right? This is 2015 for California, same data, okay? Still relatively high in Hispanic, but falling down from where it was before. But then the ascension again. So in the last 6 years, during this recovery period, we have not seen much of a change at the state level in the mix of who has bachelor's degrees and who doesn't. And the reason I'm showing you this data is because the idea is that education is, in a sense, the path to wealth, and wealth is the path to owning a home, and owning a home is the way you route labor someplace, and you have less transition. Then all these things become interconnected in the way that we generate more wealth and ultimately more housing demand in the right way. This is now in Marin County. This is 2009. Same data. Okay? In 2009, about 52% of residents in Marin had at least a bachelor's degree. The predominant ethnicity were folks that were Caucasian. Okay? 2015. Same basic pattern. Okay? So the reason I'm showing you this is because if we believe that housing has become, let's say, dichotomized between Caucasian and everybody else, part of that is because wages are dichotomized housing or education is dichotomized, they're linked to each other, which then leads to an inability to get into a house that you own. And they all play off of each other in terms of the general way of looking at the evolution of society. This is not, again, only for Marin County. Here are wages in California, and this is across more ethnicities, and this is over the last, let's say, 25 years, okay? So you can see that all ethnicities have seen an increase in wage, but the actual height of those wages are really the highest for Caucasian and Asian ethnicities, okay? So other ethnic groups are going to struggle to keep up, which again then bleeds into the ability to own a home, okay? These are all linked, and this is the point of this exercise. This is Marin County in contrast. Same thing, 1991 on the far end, sorry I did that too fast, 2000, 2009, you can notice the change is lower because of the recession, and then 2017, quarter one, the latest data, okay? Okay, now, the good news in all this is we've seen wage ascension over time, okay? The bad news is that a lot of that has been in peaks and valleys based on labor markets moving with economic cycles, okay? So as one of the things you should be concerned about is if we start to slip into recession in the next couple of years, what will happen in the wake of that, especially in terms of housing? So part of Cynthia's message, which needs to really be thought about deeply, is the time is now. If we don't do it now while all the incentive mechanisms are in place, if we do go into recession, we will start to lose what in fact we hope are the right incentives to get this thing done in terms of building more housing, okay? Now, as I said before, one of the things we've got to be very careful of is rental markets versus to own. The problem is in this recovery period, we've, for the first time, sort of, in the last, let's say, 30 years, seen basically a hand-in-hand rather than one market moves up and the other market catches up movement. We've actually seen rental markets and ownership markets moving basically side by side up, and a lot of that's a reflection of a low supply. This is rental markets. This is Marin County from 2009 to 2017. So you can see as we slip down into the depths of recession, we've been slowly ascending up. Rents have not been violently changing. This is Sonoma County, and I'll come back to that disparity in just a second. This is for a two-bedroom home on average as of, I think, September 2017. That is San Francisco. A lot more violence there in terms of the movement. Solano County, Alameda County, and then that's what Marin and Oakland basically are about the same. And there's a reason for that, which I'll get back to in a minute. But right now, a two-bedroom on average in Marin County is just under $2,800 a month. Okay? In San Francisco, there's about a $1,000 premium on that. Okay? And then there's Napa County. So notice that Sonoma, Napa, and Solano counties, all around the same amount of pricing for rental. And then there's a premium to live in Marin or Alameda County, which makes sense because it's closer to a more burgeoning labor market. And then the most burgeoning labor market has the highest rental price. Why? Because people want to live proximate to their jobs. And when the jobs are in a certain place, the demand increases where those jobs are. And then there's a ripple effect out geographically. It is extremely difficult to break that cycle, right? 7 million people in play, okay? Very tough. So what I want to try to say to you today, based on just this, and I've got a few more things to show you, is that while the solutions are there, do not expect quick solutions, nor expect there's not going to be some other market movements that are going to go against it in the short term. It really takes a collective regional will to get these things done. Here's housing affordability, at least by what the California Association of Realtors use as their measure, meaning that if you take the number of households at the median income level of those households and the current median housing price, and say how many of those households can afford to live in a home, meaning that they can afford a 30% mortgage payment. This is now 17% in Marin County. So that seems like, wow, you know, I thought it was going to be like 2, right? But at the peak of the recession right here, it was over 30%. Check this out. That's Sonoma County in contrast. So in Sonoma County, residents have lower incomes per household and lower housing prices. So there's more affordability. But as there's less affordability in Marin County, where's the spillover going to go? Right? So we got to think that there's this sort of concentric circle effect, which is classic classic in urban economics. And this is what San Francisco looks like. You can see it's basically has the same pattern as Marin, but actually is less affordable than Marin. Wow. Okay. So if San Francisco is less affordable than Marin, San Francisco's got this problem. San Mateo is actually in the same problem as a county. And the three counties together are really in this like regional microcosm of the housing issue. Okay? So unfortunately, we also have a fire problem that's come up. So we should expect there's going to be an increase in construction demand. Well, that's going to change pricing of housing. So I'm going to give you a quick piece of data that I heard anecdotally. I just got done with a construction project and it cost me about $275 a foot to build, okay, which I thought was shocking, but that's because at home I'm shocked when I see a bill for $3, but that's just me. That probably just gave you more insight than I should have been to me. But I'm hearing that it's going up to somewhere around $500 a foot minimum. Now, but folks, again, I say that's anecdotal. I give you every qualifier I could besides it's complete baloney. Because I did hear it from what I consider to be a relatively credible source. But let's think about this for a minute. I have at least at home an example of just a recent bill we just finished about 6 months ago. Think about what's changed in the marketplace. If you've got 5,000 structures that need to be built and everybody wants to do it now, those are amazing demand conditions for those that are willing to supply. If demand is spiking, again, I hate to bring this up, but think Bitcoin. Right? How does Bitcoin go from 1,000 to 11,000 bucks a coin? Because demand exceeds supply. It's that simple. So we should expect inflation of construction pricing, and unfortunately, guess what that's going to do to homes for ownership? It's going to roll right through as a priced out cost of what the new homes will go for. And not everybody who was in a home is going to necessarily rebuild in the same way, or necessarily going to live in it if they think the price is right on the other side of construction, using insurance money to get that done. So one of the things that's funny about the economics of this, or I shouldn't say funny, but is sort of the counterpoint to the tragedy, is that there's going to be this wild, dubious positive impact that's coming through insurance and federal and state funding that will help wipe out a lot of the losses over time. But it might leave us in the wake if we don't do the right thing. All of the solutions that Cynthia gave is leave us potentially with less housing stock regionally and an exacerbated problem at higher prices. So we have to have collective political, economic will to go out there and say we have an amazing opportunity in the wake of the tragedy of the fires to build more homes than we lost. We have that opportunity. We'll see if it's seized. Remember, this is a stock versus a flow issue. The housing stock has been destroyed. The flow is going to come back and potentially rebuild some of that, but we have to do it right, because my take is that we need more housing stock on the other side. This is more of a stock issue than what an economist would call a flow issue. We don't know yet what the full extent is. We think we're getting our arms slowly around it, but there's somewhere in the order of about 5,000 homes and about 3,500 other structures that were destroyed. It's the 5,000 homes we're very focused on. And like I said, they're now exacerbated, and we got to find opportunities to build more units. The alternative dwelling unit, the ADU idea, or the junior unit thing, is probably the best play in the short term. But folks, let me give you a little economist spin on that. The ADU, or the junior unit, is generally speaking not going to be a unit for sale. It will be a unit for rent. So the trade-off on that is, yes, we might get more rental units, and I think it's an absolute must we explore that as best we can, recognizing that rental is not a way to route labor locally. Okay? It is a step, but not the full step. And we will see. We need more homes for ownership, and we need them across a wider continuum of possibilities to make sure that we can get more so-called equity rather than just equality, if that in fact is what we're seeking. So to start wrapping up, these are some of the data points that are in the flyer you have. And I wanted to talk about these just real briefly in terms of recognizing some of the things that you probably already know. Rent has become less affordable in terms of what Marin County households generate as incomes and the ascension of rental prices. It is a regional phenomenon. It is not only happening in Marin County, but it's very obvious in Marin County if you're trying to rent. So where does it leave us? It leaves us with incomes that aren't necessarily getting us out of housing burden. Okay? So the way we think about housing and problems in housing is the so-called housing burden. How much of my monthly income do I have to pay to stay in my home? Okay? The percentage of households that face housing burden in Marin County is on the rise. And that's just for rental. Childcare is another cost, and this is another piece of this. If you're concerned about childcare, if you take a relatively unaffordable rent and you add to it a rising cost of childcare, and think of another thing briefly. If we're going to see transitions in labor markets, we're also going to see transitions in labor markets that you wouldn't even think of, like childcare. Childcare may become more expensive as a result of, for example, an inbound workforce that brings their families with them to exacerbate the demand for childcare based on just construction and reconstruction, okay? And right now, these are the data around what it takes to have basic childcare just for one preschooler or one infant. And if you have 2 kids, it's pretty expensive, okay? So, granted, these are, let's say, general average numbers. They're not necessarily, you know, every single case, but when you think about averages, that means there's somebody who's even higher than this, while there are people that are lower, okay? So there's childcare issues too in terms of affording housing and being able to have children here in Marin County. And as a result of that, and just something I want to talk about real quick before I talk about this last slide, one thing about that is we're seeing Marin County age and become less and less child-driven, okay, as a result of these costs. So, in terms of wealth building, it's become less affordable to buy a home also. So all these things are happening at once. And like I said earlier, in past cycles, we've seen home prices rise and rental prices slowly catch up to that rather than them both walking hand in hand. So this has been a very unique change in terms of having relatively historic high rental prices at the same time of having historic high for purchase prices. But it's all based on the market aspects. We've seen slowly rising demand and not enough supply to catch up. And the wealth building is even more of an issue. As you can see, those income levels are relatively high just to get in a home. So, where does that leave us? It leaves us sort of, in my mind, Cynthia teed it up perfectly, but there are no quick solutions. We need to make sure that we have a lot of educational opportunities, recognize this is a very slow-moving process where we need long-term political will with a lot of short-term gains to build to that point. And ultimately, we also need to, in a sense, make sure we have an entrepreneurial environment. We need people who don't see themselves in gaining access to education as a way of getting to wealth, as being able to start and maintain a business in Marin County, worst case, and the two should walk hand in hand. And those are the things that I've been thinking about when I hear questions or concerns around a housing crisis. It is not housing alone that needs to be fixed. We need to make sure our jobs are relatively wide in breadth to take on any skill level and recognize that education is one way of doing it, but education can come in all kinds of forms. So I want to leave you with something. I teach economics, which hopefully is not a big leap for you at this point, but as a part of that, over the last 5 or 6 years, I've really struggled with what do I tell students that are on the precipice of getting a degree, why A, they should choose economics, which again, you might think there's some bias there with me. But what do we do? What's going to happen to majors that are not tied somewhere to STEM? So economics, I'm lucky. STEM caught fire, and this economics is a mathematical social science. It's great for me. But the problem is there's a lot of other social sciences, a lot of arts and humanities students, a lot of classic reasons we go to college that are not providing returns on the open market. And while that might sound very cold-blooded, it is really, at the end of the day, a call for action in saying we need a different way of looking at how we educate our students in a way that they say you should pursue your passion, but you got to be market ready. And we're going to provide both of those to you. Bless you. At the state, let's say the state university and the UC level, we have to do that with our professors and our faculty. Okay? And it drips down to K through 12. All right? It's an educational challenge which then reverberates up into how we generate jobs and the supply of labor, how we generate wealth, and ultimately how we home our residents. They're all linked, and it is regional in scope, not just Marin County. So with that, Michelle, if there's time for questions, that's great. And if you have any questions, just email me or hit me on Twitter or let me know what's going on, and I'll try to take care of you. Thank you.
Thank you. That's a tremendous amount of information. I have to say that I used to be a labor economist. I worked for the Bureau of Labor Statistics. So I appreciate all that you're doing. When I worked there, we used to have a motto. It was called, the more you learn, the more you earn. That's exactly what you've shown. However, the labor market and the structure of our counties here in North Bay are very service-oriented. Mm-hmm. We have people working in grocery stores. We have people doing childcare. We have people working, taking care of elderly people. We have people working in nonprofit organizations. They're not making a minimum wage, many of them. This structure of our economy is going to continue as the wealthy people need more and more services. You can get a college degree at a fine university and you wind up working as a barista in Starbucks. So unless we change the structure of our wage system, we're going to continue to have this problem. We're not going to solve it just by everybody working in STEM jobs, even if they're telecommuting. So these are structural changes that are regional, they're national. Yep. But they impact our county much more than others, which is why we have the disparity in race, why people can't move into neighborhoods that they would like to go to. So I wonder how we can address those structural issues that in not in 20 years, in 30 years, but in 5 years that we can create. And also I want to say that not everybody is going to be able to afford a home even with a college degree. We need a lot of rental housing. We need rental housing for young college graduates. We need it for elderly people. And so far as the auxiliary dwelling units, I think that it does provide rentals. And that's what we need as well as home ownership.
Thank you. So let me try to answer the question that I think was inside of what you asked or said. The key, folks, is what can we do? So what we can do is recognize that we need a bunch of short-term wins that then would build to a better long-term future. One of those things is to start with the ADUs, build what we can, and at least have some pressure release on the supply side of the housing market. We need that. It won't necessarily deal with the equity issue, which we could see maybe as a longer-term social goal. We'll see about that. But it would deal with at least providing a little bit more relief. In terms of the STEM jobs, we should not punt on the pursuit of STEM jobs regardless. We need balance. So one of the things that we've seen in transition over the last 10 years, especially in the wake of the recession, is more of a hand-in-glove relationship between economic development, the types of employers that we bring, retain, and grow, and workforce development, how we develop indigenous labor to feed into those employers regionally or hopefully even more locally. It's very tricky. Marin County is a place where people go away for education, and as they go away, the cost of living locally rises while they are away spending money on education and then find themselves struggling to come back. So a lot of y'all who I heard are parents of kids who want to come back or you want to come back to Marin County. This is a decades-old struggle. One of the ways in which we can do that, again, in Marin Economic Forum through Robin, and a lot of efforts have been happening over time, are really looking at, is there a more hand-in-glove relationship that we can, in a sense, grab onto the future side by side rather than have workforce development running at this pace, economic development running at this pace, and neither one of them talking to each other, and then we say, oh God, why can't we find anybody locally to get this done? It's because we weren't talking to each other 4 years ago and saying, if we did these programs there at your educational institution now, it would have fed into our employee base later. We need more of that to happen, and that will help. It will not cure. There is no panacea for these problems, folks, unfortunately.
Micah?
Hi, so thank you so much actually for bringing this up, and actually I'm so happy that you brought education because I just came back from a conference from all the school board members, and Google was there talking about the jobs of the future. We have to educate kids on jobs that we don't know what they are because you know they're going to be happening, but definitely STEM, technology, science, those are things that we know that they are coming. As you know, they require more like a skilled people. That maybe it's not like a bachelor's degree, but it will have like a high level of skills for the jobs of the future. So, and then I was listening to all the a debate about all the people that they are running for to become a governor of California, and they all agree that the number one factor to get out of poverty is education, that we need to educate all our students. So we are the number 5 economy in the world, California. We are the number 43 in pupil spending in California, and what we see here in San Rafael is that 2/3 of our teachers and classified staff, they are coming from outside Marin County. So how can we afford teachers on STEM and computer science when we are competing with industries that they are paying them so much money? We need housing for them. We need like higher salaries. We really need to invest in our education in California because, you know, it's something that we are not seeing. And the number one factor again for inequity right now is actually universal preschool for everybody because that's where the gap starts. So.
Thank you. So, 2 things in that. No doubt about the fact we have to make a broader, deeper investment in education because the data are very pure and plain. That's how you get out of it. We have to do it in a way that recognizes what future job market is happening rather than just to do it. And what we don't need is we don't need teachers who are simply coming back to teach K through 12 because it's a passion project for their lives, but that they actually are trained and recognize there are returns to having that kind of career that make them somewhat equivalent to what they could do on the outside in the private labor market. Nobody else? Yes.
Hi. You and I have discussed this a bit, and I want to get you a little further along in it. I work with workforce development issues of millennials of all races, economic levels, and I see that a person with a BA in art history or literature or whatever is often eager and willing to go into something like the trades, which on one side, because we're an agency getting those people from one side, the employees they need from the other. Well, my question is there a way that we can persuade, support, or help businesses to become the education system that doesn't get us into the strict fight of which California is always in, and how come we don't spend more on education? Can business be brought to bear to do that for our millennials?
That's a great question, Marianne. So let's talk about that for a minute, because I've unfortunately ran up against this problem many times in my career. In public education, the idea of business dictating what should be taught is a big problem for all kinds of reasons. The problem on the other side, however, is you've got to provide an education that allows people to pursue careers and know that there's actually going to be job opportunities in those careers, or they will shift their focus and start to go away from education and find it where they can. One of the biggest things that's happened in the last, let's say, 7 or 8 years in terms of education is the rise of the so-called private nonprofit. So the private nonprofit kind of lives in the in-between space between a private educator that's for-profit, which we've actually seen trouble sustaining, and the public nonprofit, which is like our state universities and UC systems. That the private in the middle says, okay, guess what? We recognize that we can't do it 100% for profit because there's just not a return given how little it costs to get a public education that's got the same basic degree, got cachet, and will sell immediately on the open market. We can't compete in that space. What we can do is we compete at a higher, little higher price point, but let business fund us in such a way that we know we can pipeline into those businesses, and our curriculum is shaped 100% around that. So the general education idea in a lot of private nonprofits is that the junior colleges or the community colleges will teach the GE, we will teach the skill base, you'll get the bachelor's degree, and it'll be honed to a specific employer, and off you get. That's their selling point, rather than, let's say, a more general passion degree that I think we all know and love that when we got our bachelor's degree. So that market has changed in the last 10 years, and whether or not it'll be sustainable or not is still an open question. But that's where you see business dictating curriculum is not at the public level, but is at the private level, and that marketplace exists. I think we don't need to necessarily punt on the normal routine of us, teaching what we think is let's say, a critical thinking, liberal arts style degree at the state university and maybe a little bit more science piece at the UC level, but we have to make sure that we're responding to market.
I'm not asking them to redesign the curriculum. What I'm asking them to do is take a BA in art history into a construction site for solar installation or electricity, whatever.
Sure. So one way in which we can become more flexible is recognize we need certification, we need a vocational training to parallel the normal bachelor's degree that gives them more career flex on the other side.
I hope that you're right, but I would really like to see them just straight take a BA and into electrician's job or something and go from there. Do you see what I'm saying?
I know what you're saying. That
It's like
I guess,
a real apprenticeship.
Yeah, I think you'll find that it needs to be a little bit more explicit. That to be a selling point. That's my opinion.
Gotcha.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Olivia Beltran, and what concerns me is when I hear you saying equity will come after. Because it's very important as a leading role at Marin Economic Forum that you integrate that from the get-go, from the foundation. Why? Because everyone in this room has the possibility to do that. How do you do that? First, making sure that you have people of color in your board of directors, and then that you give living wage jobs to people that come from underrepresented communities. I don't think that should be futuristic. I think it should be instituted with a foundation. And then to just let everyone know, the City of San Rafael this evening at 7 p.m. will have the discussion about district elections. And that probably would be important for underrepresented communities in San Rafael. But if you care about the underrepresented communities, that would be an important thing to attend. So again, I feel that as a role, leading role in marine economics, it's very important to consider underrepresented communities from the beginning. And at every level, if the second units are going to be there, is there going to be a certain percentage for people that are underrepresented and very low income? Because it's just devastating to see what has happened in this Marin County and how my people have to travel so many, maybe many more people traveling from outside. But it's so unfair. I've been here in this county 34 years, and there's no opportunity for people that are underrepresented. So it's very important as leading people to make sure that that place is there for everyone.
Totally appreciate that. Just have your expectations tempered. It is a slow ride, okay? And that's why I say have it always there, but don't see it happening very, very quickly. There's an enormous number of forces that are bound up against it, unfortunately.
Hi, Rob. Thank you.
Sure.
I'm Ann Matheson from Marin Promise Partnership, and one of my questions and concerns is that when we talk about the jobs that are growing in Marin, which are service jobs, clerk jobs, et cetera, those are low-wage jobs. So how do we justify that, and how do we not talk about careers that go into service industry, et cetera, which we know we're channeling people into low-wage jobs? How do we resolve that in Marin?
It's very tricky because as the demand for those service jobs continues to rise, the economic incentive to grow more of those rises. And so you have to, again, have economic development and workforce development walking hand in hand. We want this outcome, so we have to say no to things that we normally would say yes to, recognizing by saying no, the cost of those things we're saying no to will rise. And the trade-off is the positive aspects of having more, let's say, balanced growth of jobs that aren't just service jobs, that we're going to get other things in the wake of that. But they have to walk hand in hand. If they don't, natural market forces will just skew everything where demand is, and in 10 years from now, we'll be talking about the same exact topic.
Hi, I'm Cheryl, Nevada Youth Center. I have a question about attracting workforce, and you talked a lot about workforce development, and for a lot of us in the room, we compete for the same hires, mostly inbound from Sonoma, and with that, we all look at competitive wages and benefit packages, and so I've been thinking a lot about what you just said about middle scale gap and marginally employed workforce. Mm-hmm. And so if we have a workforce that's predominantly millennials, are you suggesting then, just bigger picture, more upstream, that we should be focusing more on educational stipends as benefit packages versus retirement matching?
That's one way. Thank you for bringing that up. It's one way to say in the short term that we recognize we need to make an investment in you now, not necessarily something that you're going to take on later, because one will beget the other. You could do that. That's one alternative way of looking at attraction and retention of workers. Sure. Sure. And there's probably plenty of other ones coming too. So, but you're going to have to get more creative. There's no doubt about it. And folks, let me just say something real quick for the record. We need to be creative now. The unfortunate thing that happens to every economic cycle as it ends, the positive trade-off of the end of a cycle is it acts as a natural cleansing agent of the labor markets. And then you end up on the other side, maybe with people that really rethink what they want to do as a career, which can be a great opportunity to pick people up, but there's a lot of detritus in that wake.
Any other questions or comments? Thank you, Rob.
Thanks, Michelle.
I think Rob had a lot of coffee on his drive down 101. That was more information in 1 hour than I've had since my double liberal arts degree. That might not get me very far today. To wrap up, we are very glad to welcome Robin Sternberg, the CEO for the Marin Economic Forum, and just continue. Thank you.
Good morning, everyone. I'm really happy to be here to talk about this important issue, the struggle of working families, and why this is such an important issue for all of us here in Marin. I moved here about 3 years ago now, so it's been really fascinating for me to get to know this community and understand the dynamics. So I came from Minneapolis, and I worked for the governor's office, and I worked on economic development, and specifically worked on his platform around our high black-white unemployment disparity that we had at the time, and still probably have. So it's so interesting to come here and find some of the similar themes happening. When I saw, in fact, that report last week, the Advancement Project California report that was mentioned earlier, it set off alarms for me. And I have to say, maybe a little bit different from Rob, I am not going to temper our goal to address these issues. This report showed that Marin County has the highest racial inequality, the second highest disparity in economic opportunity, crime and justice, and the #1 highest disparity in housing inequality. And so I feel that this is posing the question to all of us, are we going to continue to accept the status quo here with those figures? No. I hope not. I think that most of us here feel that the inequality that we have here doesn't really reflect the community that we want to live in and the values that we hold. I know that many of you are working very hard to address these issues. Many of the nonprofits who are here, are really devoted to this issue. But as hard as we work and have been working on this, it has not been enough. So we need to do more, and we need to find a new way. A lot of us don't really know what to do. How can we change this? And because it's not really, in front of our faces every day, it's pretty easy to go home, move on, and hope that somebody is doing something about it. So I don't know. I know a lot of people are trying to do something about it, but I don't know where the true leadership is happening, or the collaboration is happening. But as an economic development professional, I'm here to talk about the broad impact that disparities have on our economy, and what, in my opinion, is needed to change the status quo. An important project that's underway with the United Way is called the ALICE Report. And what they're doing is they're going around the country, and they're looking and examining at every state and every county. Now, I think they've only done 15 states so far. And it's called the ALICE Project because ALICE stands for Asset Limited, Income Constrained, Employed. This project is focused on the working poor, people working hard but squeezed between the nation's poorest and its middle class. These people are struggling every day just to be able to have the basic necessities for their families, their education, access to food, health care, housing, transportation, and childcare. The ALICE Project is working to understand the challenges that working poor face in each county. And their report has not come out yet, but they're working on kind of a conclusion that I'm really looking forward to reading. One thing the ALICE report tells us is that the size of the workforce in each state that is struggling financially is much higher than the federal poverty guidelines suggest, and that the number of individuals in this income level is growing. This is a pretty dire picture, and it matters because we are all impacted by it. Research by another source called the Equity Trust has outlined some of the broad impacts from high degrees of income inequality. They found that, or they report that, wage inequality decreases worker productivity. Productivity is greatly affected by whether an employee believes that their pay is fair. And it decreases productivity if they feel that some wages, excessive wages, are not justified. And this makes them less committed. An employee's productivity is further lowered if their pay is low enough that they are struggling to afford their basic expenses. Well, this is exactly what's happening. People living with scarcity have added stress and devote a significant portion of their time focused on these problems that are related to scarcity and distracts them from their work. Further, stress from wage inequality leads to greater health issues and more time taken off work. Lagging progress on education levels strain our education system and are predictors of future income potential as early as the age of 5. On the macro level, wage inequality causes weak consumer demand and economic instability and the risk for crisis, whereas more equal income societies tend to have longer periods of sustained growth. So what are the costs in Marin County that we have? I'm looking at this report. 1/3 of our Marin County families are an ALICE population. 10,000 families. Our usual response and the right response is to put more into education, and that is really important, starting ready for kindergarten. And I know Marin Promise is doing a great job at addressing education levels and achievement at all stages of education. If we do have this population graduate, we need to do a better job of getting them into 2-year degrees, 4-year colleges, or some kind of skilled certificate. And an organization like 10,000 Degrees is doing a great job working on that as well. But these people, the other couple things that they need is work experience, apprenticeships, internships. We have to go farther to connect employers and jobs to these people with their skills that we're developing for them, or they're developing for themselves. So if all that goes well, and then they can't afford to live here, then what happens? Well, they move away. After all the investment we've made in them, they move away. And then we instead import workers. And that costs us less because we're losing the earnings of the people that we invested in. 61,000 workers commute here to Marin each day. If only 1% of those workers, that's 61 people, lived in Marin, that would amount to a $14 million infusion to our economy. All we need is 61 people to live in this county, and we get 14 million infusion. So shouldn't our goal be to increase the number of live-work population here in the county? I believe that we've already talked about density and how we should be really looking at creating density around transportation, and that's absolutely right. We can do it in a way that enhances our community. It doesn't have to diminish the way that our community looks. It can actually add value. A live-work lifestyle is a critical component of a modern, healthy economy. It elevates our overall community experience. Living in the same city as our workplace has multiple benefits that include shortened commute times, decreased congestion, minimizing our air quality impacts, increasing worker productivity, greater sustainability, greater social and economic diversity. It keeps our earnings in Marin, fosters a greater sense of cohesion within a community, which all-encompassing improves our quality of life. So what is needed to improve the financial situation of our ALICE families and reduce our inequality? as our speakers before have mentioned, there is not a silver bullet. The issues are deep-rooted, complex, and challenging. I suggest the first thing we need to do is to ask our leaders to declare this as the #1 social and economic issue we face. Then it will require a systemic approach. We need to expand a nonpartisan discussion to inform a comprehensive policy that crosses all sectors. We should be looking at wages. Right now, the minimum wage in California is $10.50, and the brochure that shows you how far people have to go to be able to afford to even rent an apartment here. Education. We need to look at education all the way along, starting with ready for kindergarten, and work on this already, from the 0 to 5-year-old kids. Right now, only 60% of our students meet the minimum requirements for the California Public University. That's not good enough. And really the number is less for low-income families or kids at 30%. We have to look at job education and training that lead to high-paying careers, look at job availability with under 3% unemployment. We have to incentivize companies to hire local. Employers must be on board and provide summer jobs, internships, apprenticeships for high school students and college students. And we've already talked about the housing issue already, but providing affordable places to live near your job. We also need to ease regulations. So that's quite a comprehensive list of to-do list. In closing, to change the status quo, it will require an all-hands-on-deck commitment with engaged leaders from all sectors: education, government, workforce training, housing, nonprofits, grassroots community leaders, and employers. We will all need to work together to make this the #1 social and economic issue in the county. On a positive note, I am an optimist, and I think we do have the will. Timing is everything. We have the passion, we have the leadership, and all the factors are in place. And I believe that Marin is ready to evolve. I'm excited to see what our community will look like in 10 years. I think it will be more vibrant, more diverse. We will have innovative growing companies. We will have a healthy live-work density, and we will have the smartest workforce in the state of California. Thank you.
Thank you, Robin. Thanks very much to Robin and to Rob from the Marin Economic Forum. And thank you all for joining us today. We look forward to seeing you next time.